Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I'm back for only a week this time, and then I'm heading off to Melbourne and Chura and New Zealand and parts unknown. Kind of on a big driving trip, so I have my wife with me, and we're just going to go back and reminisce about our historic days in Victoria that were back in 83, 84. So we'll revisit Victoria again. As Peter said, I want to just give you an update on what I've been up to, and this is only the tiny little part. I've got new projects in Alaska and Upper Great Lakes and a whole bunch of new things, but we'll dispense with that and just talk about the Samford work. This is just the front page of our website, so for those of you who would like to go there and dabble in the Soundscape, that website is an open access website, so you can go there and look at the project or any of the other projects that are online. As probably most of you know, or some of you know, that I've been around for a few years trying to promote the importance of sound as an ecological attribute. And I won't go into the gory details of all that because we've been there before. We've had, oh, I don't know, 5 or 6 workshops over the last 7 years, Peter, I suppose. And we've gone through a lot of the details and so on. So I'd just like to give you a little bit of an update on the work that has been going on in Samford. Jason and I and others have been collaborating to put up some sensors there. He had his group of sensors, and I put a group of sensors up to do a kind of a test. And I locked into a technology that I liked working with from Wildlife Acoustics. So they're little sensors that, if we go to the next slide, that look like this, little boxes tied to trees, and they have little ears on them, and these little ears are the microphones. And this is the technology we're using, sampling at 22 kilohertz, and collecting wave files, and record every 30 minutes for a 2-minute duration. And that just goes on and on. And they record every half hour. And we set them up about almost exactly at this time of the year last year. And I stayed out at Samford for 17 days and was able to kind of get things set up on my own, hobble around in a little cane, going down dirt tracks and trying to avoid the snakes down here. And this is the process that we go through. I want to, first of all, recognize Ole, who is not here anymore, but he did a lot of the legwork, and of course Michelle and Jason were major players in the logistics of all this, and they helped, fix things that I had broken, or fix things, made them better when I hadn't done that. So they certainly deserve a lot of the congratulations for keeping these things going, particularly during a nasty time of the year. It was about the day I left, it started raining. It never stopped. Now I've come back and I brought the drug with me or something. So anyway, the process goes like this. You program the recorders, you deploy them in the field, and then you collect the recordings on a little CD card. You FTP them to the a regional server up in Michigan State University. You run an auto program which loads them up into the digital library. You compute some metrics, and then you can access the data and the metrics, and you can browse and search and do all kinds of filtering, and then you can analyze and interpret the information. That's basically the flow of work. These are where the 8 sensors were located, trying to give them a little bit of diversity. A couple in the automatic thing going on here. Some open field areas, one near one of Peter's gas chambers, and next to a little farm. One near the barracks, a couple on the roads going in, one down by the creek, and a couple on the walking tracks going away from the center. These are the sites. obviously the barrack site, but behind there is some interesting vegetation. Here's the one down by the gas shed, down by the creek, and then on one of the forest walking tracks. The other sites were located on the paper bar, one in adjacent one of the old drives, one adjacent of the new drives, and then along the walking track. So just kind of trying to capture little differences in habitat that are on the site. A little bit of background. So here's what these things sound like. While this is playing, I'll kind of give you an idea about how we look at the world from a standpoint of most of the biological information ranges between 2 and 11 kilohertz. There's machines and other what we call technophony or human voices tend to be down at lower frequencies. And then we divided up the sound into these different sound levels to try and look at the kinds of patterns of sounds at these different frequencies. And certainly we have a long time series so we can look at those over time. But here's for example, 4 o'clock in the morning, and then half an hour later, the whole world changes. Fascinating transition during just that period. Of course, this is on the 18th of November, kind of in late spring. So the butcher birds and other critters wake up and start doing their work. This is a little video that I produced for Michelle that I think she liked. I think Jason liked it too. But it's the idea of trying to take a visual view of the world at Samford and trying to see if we can understand how the sounds are dynamic over a day. So this is just looking at a single day, recording at midnight, just going through the time. I'm going to show some spectrograms, just recording the first 7 seconds, and then switch to the next one. I just want you to see the dynamics of how these look. So this is a spectrogram of the sound going over time. So you probably can't read this, but we're at 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:30. And you can see it changes. You can hear the crickets and some of the frogs croaking. Maybe I'll try and speed this along. So it's sort of a fascinating view of drag this along. Here's this transition that I was talking about, going from 4 o'clock to 4:30. You can see the soundscape just changes dramatically at that time because of the beginning of the dawn chorus. So these are just some examples of the different types of sounds. This is This is what I do, is select information from this real library. You can search for particular frequency values, or you can pick sensors. You can pick the year, the month, the day, the time of day, the sensor unit, and so on. And then you can query those, and it'll just pull that information up so you can get a subset. So here's an example of the sounds. That happens to be at 6 o'clock in the morning. Here's one at 5 o'clock. So a lot of dynamics going on. You probably would recognize it. So I got very interested in these patterns and how these patterns change over time, and I'm looking at the patterns not from the species standpoint of who's in the recording, but actually from the amount of energy that's coming out of the ecosystem. So it's really, my perspective is kind of from an energy perspective, and as you'll hear from Jason and others, Mike I think too, we'll talk about some of the species identification that are being done, but I'm looking at the amount of energy. And so this little bar graph here is the idea of looking at the amount of energy in each one of the different frequency levels. And you can see right here, between 4 and 5 kilohertz, that's where most of the energy is in this particular sample of the soundscape. With a nice, this is representing this low frequency area here. We can see as we go up, you can see different levels, but most of the energy is occurring right around in this area right here. Just play that for you. You can actually see the soundscape. See that? Those little dots right there, those are the, who knows what that animal is? Anybody?
Michelle, it's a koala.
It's a koala.
So out of the library then, we put information into this digital library, and these are the recordings. These are the numbers of recordings from each one of these sensor types in the library, 50,000 recordings, amounting to almost half a terabyte of observations. And this is the process that we go through to do it. You got to collect the data, which is down here. You upload the observations into a data bank, sort of a temporary storage spot. Then we compute some indices, and that happens up here. Then we archive those and put them into the acoustic library. And then we can access the information in a number of different ways. We archive, access, analyze, and then interpret. And the observations can be interpreted on the web in real time if you want, or download them and put them into a program like SAS or SPSS or Minitab or whatever you're happy or familiar with in terms of statistical analysis. So what I got interested in taking a look at for this particular presentation is what about the time of day when the soundscape changes its energy profile? What time of the year does most of the energy occur in? What are the dominant sound frequencies that are happening in the soundscape? And then what are the energy sources? And I'm going to leave the energy sources up to Jason. He'll tell you about his amazing project to actually identify the sources of the soundscape. So I got interested in some of these precipitous changes in the sound energy as you go from dawn till dusk or from night till dawn, to look at some of those changes, looking at the night versus the day sound energy shifts, and then looking at the total energy patterns. So these are some questions that I don't think I'm going to answer, but perhaps they could lead into some interesting discussion at some time. But what's going on in an ecosystem? What's the meaning of sound? How does sound energy output relate to ecosystem function? A lot of people will approach those of us interested in sound and say, well, you know, the organism that I study doesn't make any noise, so why should I bother in being interested in sound? Well, the point is that there are trophic interactions. So if you hear a butcher bird, there's meaning. That butcher bird's working. It's doing something. What do butcher birds do? Well, they're predators, and they're busy preying on the species that they work on. So there are some translations, even though we don't know exactly what they're eating. We know that there are other animals in the ecosystem because the butcher bird is there. And you can make that interpretation in terms of many, many different animals, whether it's sulfur-crested cockatoos or the scarlet kingfisher. Scarlet kingfisher? Sailor kingfisher. Yeah. Scared kingfisher. Okay, so you can then make inferences about the ecosystem function by the sounds that occur. So a long time ago, Mike Townsend and I had lots of conversations about how do you build metrics to try and compute the amount of energy in the soundscape. I came upon this application using what's called a power spectral density analysis that was derived from a person who studied sound in a way to come up with pulling the amount of energy out of sound. Then I normalize the power spectral density to enable a comparison between, sort of within between places. So here's the raw power. Here's what it looks like. It can range from huge numbers like this in the low frequency to very, very small numbers like this. So you can have this huge range, and when you normalize it, it helps to minimize that variance. But Jason and I were looking at this yesterday, and he said, what the heck is that thing up there? What's that dot up here? Why is that noise so dominant? Well, I went and dug up the information out of the digital library. That's what it is. So, in some cases, there are, very, very loud noises that are coming out of the ecosystem, and in other cases, there are very quiet noises. Now, here's the normalized value. So this is looking at just a single day, sort of the raw data coming out of the Soundscape. And that's what it looks like when you normalize it between 0 and 1. So all these values that I'm going to show you in the next few slides are ranging from 0 to 1. And that's basically what this says. When I'm looking at all the different frequencies from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 up the scale of frequency, up the pitch, to look at the comparison between night and morning, day and evening. I can't go into the details too much about the interpretation, but I want you to just take a look at these patterns and see what you think. These are the 4 sites that I concentrated on. Here's again the spectrogram, looking at these different levels. We're going up in pitch, up in frequency. And I take slices and looking at each one of these energy slices. Here's a day, and look at these patterns. Now here's the difference between these 4 sites. Very low amount of energy in the 1 to 2 kilohertz range in this site, compared to this site, and similar to site 3. And you can see how those changes occur. Now here's the beginning of the changes from the evening to the dawn, and through the day. So you can see high values to low values. So this is looking at time of day, and this is looking at the energy. Patterns, 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 patterns. Took site number 1, which was one of the sites down by that little farm, and where Peter was doing some of his gas monitoring. Collected a fair number of sounds from each one of those from that site for the periods of months. So I averaged these values over time to look at the changes in the soundscape. So this is just a little primer. So the frequency values here range from 0 to 1. Here are some day sounds. You can see right here, no sound, or not much energy, to higher amounts and then down again. These are the dawn sounds, increases in energy and then decline as evening progresses. And here's some night sounds, high values here, and then dropping off during the day, and increasing again, and then rising again as dusk occurs and the crickets begin to increase their sound. So you can see some of these patterns. Right here, this is like total energy, and this is an index that I used over time to try and look at the ratio of biological sound to technological sound. Let's listen to a few of these. This is midnight. So if you go out to Samford and sit down in the dark and listen, and if you do that about now, that's probably what you're going to hear. If we look at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's crows at least are woken up. They're busy doing their business. You still hear some resident insects and others. By noon, the cicadas have started coming online. This is in the fairly distant background, but you can see the patterns of the cicadas. A little bit of wind. And then here's another one, interesting one. that? Is that yours? Jason and his kids. That was the sensor near the little farmstead, and so I imagine they have a little party and invited the kids over for a soccer game or whatever. But again, you can see the sounds of the humans have sounds in the lower frequency bands here. These little flecks are all the kid sounds, and then we've got crickets and other animals living there. So I'm not gonna make a lot of interpretation about these patterns. Just look at these changes. But what I was quite interested in is the consistency of some of these patterns over time. Really, the amazing changes in these energies as we go over time at these different frequency levels. So you can see nighttime at the lower. This is 3 to 4 kilohertz. Lots of sound at night, and disappearing and then increasing again. Here we have very low sounds at night. This is at the 5 to 6 frequency. This is mainly in the bird range, so you don't expect to be a lot of high frequency bird songs occurring at night. But as soon as the dawn chorus begins to, the birds begin to wake up around 4 o'clock in the morning, sounds start to increase, and then they stay and then dissipate. And so these are all the different frequency levels, and I'm going to walk through November through May, so you can just see these changes. Here's December. Lots of night sounds, not much going on in the daytime. Lots of day sounds with not much happening at night, depending on which frequency band you look at. January, February, March. Now these averages are the averages of all of the 6 o'clock in the morning for the 30 days. So that's what these little bars are here. So they're averaged at that particular time. So every half hour we're averaging across the month. And I didn't know what period to pick, so I thought a month would be reasonable just to kind of get the changes in the seasonal dynamics. April, May, and so on. Then I took the different sensors, the 8 sensors, and then did the same thing. Looked at sensor number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And they're all quite different. They're all reflecting what that habitat is like, and that's why I've been so keen to do vegetation analysis out at Samford, so that we actually know what vegetation type, what habitat type is there, and how do we classify those habitat types so we can correlate these sound characteristics to habitat type. And then this is just a bar chart series showing the different sensors, different locations for each one of these different frequencies. And you can see this one happens to be sensor number 6, which is dominant in the low frequency. Here's sensor number 5, dominant in a very high frequency. So you can see differences between the different types of sensors. So I started getting more statistical in my thinking about how to interpret this, and I came up with actually subsampling sounds within these different frequencies. And I don't think I'll go through any particular interpretation except to say there's lots of work to be done in terms of the quantification and how we interpret these patterns that we see. Certainly there's a wonderful opportunity to do time series analysis with all of this. I've got a lot of people now interested in how do we interpret these patterns, looking at the temporal dynamics. So time series, it's a rich area. So there's lots of changes in the soundscape. There are major acoustic energy shifts. There are acoustic patterns that are dynamic, and the patterns make sense to me. I can see them, I can interpret them, I know what's going on. And one of the things that I'm really anxious to do now is to merge sort of these energy patterns with the kinds of work that Jason's been doing to try and come up with the actual identification of who's in the soundscape. So we have lots of work to do. I've been relatively busy this year, probably had one of my better years of all the years that I've been a professor. After I retired, I started publishing. But we got this is a PhD student that recently graduated that did a study of the interpretation of the variability of the soundscape in urban areas, trying to look at what does the cityscape look like and how does that vary over time. This is a study of ensemble extraction, trying to classify and detect species. This is an old study that we did in Sequoia National Park with a guy named Bernie Krause, who was a wonderful historic soundscape ecologist, and so on. So there's lots of things that are starting to emerge, and I am just so excited about what's happening here at QUT and ISR and beyond with respect to the interest there is in the soundscape. And I think that interest is going to continue, and as all of you, or all of you working in the sound area knows, there's more and more interest in this area as time goes on. So I'm still very excited about this. I want to thank Peter for allowing me to do what I enjoy, this kind of integrating biology and technology to try and understand the soundscape in this case. And of course Michelle and Jason and Christine and have helped tremendously in terms of just making my life easy getting here and being here and having fun. And of course Ole, and I know he did lots of work in terms of the nasty data collection stuff and going out and slogging around in the rain, pulling the sensors out of the song meters and uploading the data with Jason's help. So thanks to everybody.